I don't know.
You don't know?
Well, I'm not sure.
You're not sure. I'm intrigued. Are you married or not? These are not difficult questions.
There are movies that entertain you, and then there are movies that rearrange something inside you. Steel Magnolias is the second kind. It is the sort of film that makes grown adults sob into their popcorn, then immediately dial their mothers, and then sob again when their mother picks up. Released in November of 1989, this ensemble drama about 6 women in a small Louisiana town became one of the most beloved films of its decade, and it has never really left the cultural conversation since. On the surface, it looks deceptively simple. A beauty salon in Natchitoches, Louisiana. A group of women who gather there to gossip, grieve, celebrate, and hold each other together. A young bride named Shelby, played by Julia Roberts, who has type 1 diabetes and wants nothing more than to be a mother, even though her doctor has made the risks devastatingly clear. Her mother MLYNN, played by Sally Field, who loves her daughter with the ferocity of someone who already knows how the story ends. But behind that seemingly straightforward story is a constellation of facts, real-life tragedies, production secrets, and strange decisions that most audiences have never heard. The true story behind Steel Magnolias is, in many ways, more heartbreaking than the film itself. And that is saying something, because the film will absolutely destroy you. So settle in. Here are 15 things about Steel Magnolias that you probably did not know, and that you will not forget once you do. Herbert Ross was a veteran of Hollywood with impressive credits behind him, including The Goodbye Girl and Footloose. He knew how to make films. What he apparently did not know was how to treat a 21-year-old actress who was still building her confidence on her first major studio production. Julia Roberts, who was the youngest and least experienced person in an ensemble packed with screen legends, found herself on the receiving end of Ross's harshest criticism throughout filming. He questioned her choices, undermined her instincts, and reduced her to tears on multiple occasions. By any reasonable professional standard, the behavior was unacceptable. By the standards of the more experienced actresses on set, it was also something they were not prepared to simply watch happen. Sally Field later spoke about how difficult Ross was toward Roberts during production, noting that the younger actress was essentially the baby of the group, and that the veteran cast felt protective of her. Dolly Parton, who never shied away from speaking plainly, had her own legendary encounter with Ross when he asked whether she could actually act. Her response has become one of the most quoted lines in Hollywood lore. "No, but it is your job to make it look like I can." Ross apparently thought better of pushing that particular line of conversation any further. It was Shirley MacLaine who ultimately confronted the director directly. She told Ross that he had been behaving badly since the death of his wife, prima ballerina Nora Kay, who had passed away approximately 18 months before production began. MacLaine made clear that the cast was aware of his grief, sympathetic to it, and unwilling to allow it to be redirected onto a young actress trying to do her job. The veteran women of the cast effectively staged an intervention, and the dynamic on set shifted. The remarkable irony is that the tension Ross created may have accidentally deepened the on-screen chemistry. When a group of women band together in defense of one of their own, the resulting bond is real, and on screen, it looked exactly like that. Before Julia Roberts became Shelby Eaton-Latry, the role passed through the hands of several other actresses, each of whom either declined it or departed before filming could begin. Daryl Hannah was actually offered the lead first. Producers believed she had the presence and the emotional range to anchor the film. Hannah read the material, considered her options, and politely declined, asking instead to play Annelle, the shy, complicated newcomer with the uncertain backstory and the impressive capacity for reinvention. It was a choice that surprised some, but Hannah understood something the producers may not have fully appreciated yet. Sometimes the supporting role is the more interesting one. After Hannah's decision, the producers turned to Meg Ryan. She signed on, seemed committed, and then left a star in When Harry Met Sally, a film that, to be fair, worked out reasonably well for her. For the Steel Magnolias team, her departure meant starting over. The search continued. Winona Ryder was considered, though she was around 16 or 17 at the time, which made the role of a married woman navigating the physical consequences of a diabetic pregnancy a significant stretch even by the creative standards of Hollywood casting. Laura Dern was also in the conversation. Neither of them landed the part. Julia Roberts came in as a relative unknown, still finishing work on Mystic Pizza, with almost no name recognition to speak of. She walked into the room, delivered an audition that made the people in that room believe immediately, and the role was hers. What followed was one of the most celebrated breakthrough performances of the decade and an Academy Award nomination that nobody saw coming, except, perhaps, for the people who were in that audition room. Getting a role is one thing. Understanding who you are actually playing is something else entirely. Julia Roberts did not simply learn the script and show up on set. She went directly to the source of the story, spending time with the family of Robert Harling, the playwright who wrote Steel Magnolias as a tribute to his late sister Susan. Harling's parents welcomed her into their home, shared stories about Susan, and gave Roberts access to the texture of a real person's life rather than the shape of a fictional character on a page. Harling himself later described the experience of watching Roberts walk through his parents' door for the first time. He said that when she entered the room, it felt as though someone had turned on a light. Not because she looked like Susan. She did not particularly, but because she carried something similar in the way she moved through a space. A warmth, an energy, the kind of presence that makes people instinctively want to be close to it. Roberts was not just preparing a performance during those visits. She was collecting a person, gathering the specific details, the particular ways of speaking, the emotional weight of a life that had ended too soon. She was building Shelby not from a script but from the memory that a family was still carrying. When she eventually stood in front of the cameras, she was carrying some of that memory with her. The story behind the story is this. In 1985, Robert Harling's sister, Susan, died at the age of 33. Her death was caused by complications from type 1 diabetes, the same complications that kill Shelby in the film. Doctors had told Susan that pregnancy could seriously damage her already fragile kidneys. She decided to proceed anyway. In 1983, she gave birth to a son, whom she named Robert after her brother. 2 years later, she was gone. Harling was devastated, but what haunted him beyond the grief itself was a specific fear that Susan's son would grow up without any memory of her, that he would go through his life not knowing who his mother had been, how she laughed, how she talked, the kind of room-filling presence she had. A writer friend encouraged Harling to write it down, to put Susan on the page in a way that could outlast all of them. He tried a short story first, but quickly realized that Susan and the women of her world did not fit inside the contained space of prose. They needed dialogue. They needed to interrupt each other, talk over each other, fill the room with the kind of overlapping conversations that are the texture of real Southern life. They needed a stage. So Harling sat down and wrote. He did not write an outline or a draft or a treatment. He wrote the entire play, start to finish, in 10 days. He described the experience later as a 24-hour-a-day wave of Southernness pouring out of him until the play was finished. What began as a private act of grief and preservation became one of the most performed plays of the 1980s, and then one of the most beloved films of 1989. He wrote it so his nephew would know who his mother was. The rest of the world just happened to be listening. Dylan McDermott played Jackson, Shelby's devoted husband, in Steel Magnolias. By the time the production wrapped, he and Julia Roberts were engaged in real life. The arithmetic of this is not complicated. Small Louisiana town. Intense production. Difficult director creating a pressure cooker atmosphere. A group of people thrown together for months, with little to do in the evenings. Roberts had recently ended a relationship with Liam Neeson, and then there was McDermott, playing her loving husband every day in front of the cameras. It is not the most shocking development in Hollywood history. The engagement lasted approximately 1 year. Roberts met Kiefer Sutherland on the set of Flatliners, which set an entirely different chain of events in motion. McDermott, for his part, later found considerable success on The Practice, where he spent 7 seasons as a lead. Both parties appear to have recovered from the relationship, with their careers and dignity intact. It is worth noting that this kind of thing happens on film sets with enough regularity that it has essentially become its own subgenre of Hollywood storytelling. Spend 3 months pretending to be passionately in love with someone, and your nervous system occasionally gets confused. When Steel Magnolias was still a stage production in New York, Bette Davis attended a performance. By the time the curtain came down, she had already made a decision. She was going to play Weiser Boudreau, the magnificently cantankerous neighbor whose gruffness conceals a deeply loyal heart. She contacted Robert Harling directly and invited him to tea at her hotel. Harling, understandably, assumed someone was playing a joke on him. He arrived to find Davis sitting with a teacup and an agenda. She did not just tell him she wanted the role. She began casting the rest of the film for him. Katharine Hepburn for Clary, Elizabeth Taylor for Truvy. She assembled an entire cast of Hollywood royalty at a tea table in New York and presented it to the writer of the play as though the matter were largely settled. As Harling was leaving, Davis delivered what she framed as a polite farewell, but was clearly a warning. He could give the role to someone else, she said, but he and that person would hear from Bette Davis. The producers ultimately decided not to cast her, citing concerns about the physical demands of the role, given her health at the time. Davis died in October of 1989, the same month the film was in theaters. Shirley MacLaine took the role and delivered exactly the kind of unhinged, deeply felt performance that Davis would have brought. The character was in good hands. The scene that everyone who has ever seen Steel Magnolias remembers is the one in the cemetery. MLYNN has just buried her daughter. The other women are standing around her, not knowing what to say. And then something in MLYNN breaks open, loudly, messily, with the full force of a grief that has been held together for too long. Sally Field filmed that breakdown in one take. To prepare for it, Field spent hours screaming into a pillow before the cameras rolled. She wanted her voice to already be raw when filming began. She wanted the physical instrument of her body to carry the evidence of grief before she even stepped in front of the lens. Director Herbert Ross, who had been difficult throughout the production, recognized what was happening and simply let her go. No direction, no adjustments, no call to cut. He stepped back and gave Field the space to go wherever the scene took her. When it was over, nobody on set moved immediately. The crew stood in silence. Some of them were crying. The kind of stillness that follows a performance like that is its own particular thing. The moment when everyone present realizes they have just witnessed something they will not forget. The technical setup for the cemetery scene took multiple days. The breakdown itself, the moment that made the film immortal, took about 90 seconds and a single try. Herbert Ross had many qualities that made him a difficult collaborator. One of those qualities, at least in practical terms, was that he refused to fake anything he could make real. When it came to the salon scenes, which are, after all, the setting of the entire film, Ross was not interested in clever camera angles that would conceal the fact that his actresses had no idea what they were doing with scissors and a can of Aquanet. He brought in professional hairstylists and put the cast through intensive, hands-on training. Not full cosmetology school, but close enough that the women could cut, tease, set, and style with something resembling actual competence. Dolly Parton, who has maintained her signature look with remarkable consistency since the early 1970s, had to learn how to do other people's hair, a skill she had never particularly needed before and would never particularly need again after filming ended. The opening scene of the film, in which Truvy works on Shelby's hair while also delivering sharp comedic observations about life in Chinkapin, required Parton to hit comedic timing, remember dialogue, and not accidentally damage Julia Roberts' hair simultaneously. Ross refused to let the actresses retreat behind the safety of camera tricks. If they were going to play women who worked in a salon, they were going to know what working in a salon actually looked like. The training worked. Nobody watching the film has ever doubted for a moment that Truvy and Annelle know their way around a beauty parlor. Filming in a small Louisiana town with a difficult director and a long shooting schedule meant that the cast spent a great deal of time together outside of work hours. They gathered for dinners, played games, talked late into the evening in the way that people do when they are all surviving the same experience together. Shirley MacLaine later said that they formed genuine friendships during that period, the kind that outlasted the production itself. During one of these gatherings, Harling went around the table and asked each actress what kind of role she would most like to play next. It was the sort of question that passes easily at dinner tables. Sally Field had an answer ready. She said she wanted to play a woman who got to wear beautiful clothes and be genuinely terrible. After years of playing noble, long-suffering, morally upright characters in serviceable wardrobes, she wanted glamour and the freedom to behave badly on screen. Harling filed that answer away. 2 years later, he wrote Soap Dish, a Hollywood comedy built almost entirely around Sally Field playing a glamorous, manipulative soap opera star in designer clothes. Field got exactly the role she had described at a dinner table in Louisiana because she happened to mention it to the right person at the right moment. The lesson here is that you should always tell writers what you want. They remember everything. Robert Harling wrote Steel Magnolias to process the death of his sister. He then watched it become a stage production, and then a major Hollywood film, and then he found himself standing in front of a camera in his own movie, playing the minister who officiates the 2 most important ceremonies in Shelby's life. Director Herbert Ross asked Harling to take the role. Harling was not a professional actor, but he had some familiarity with performing the material. He had filled in for an absent actor during a stage production and knew the rhythms of the piece well. Ross felt he was the right person for the job, and Harling accepted. He presided over Shelby's wedding at the beginning of the film, pronouncing the marriage of his fictional sister to her husband, and he presided over her funeral at the end, committing her soul to God. He bookended the entire married life of a character who was based on his real sister, playing the man of God in both the moment of joy and the moment of ruin. He later described the experience as surreal, which is a word that seems inadequate for what it actually was. To write about the worst thing that has ever happened to you, to watch someone else perform it, and then to step inside the frame yourself to say the prayers, that is not a creative exercise. That is grief finding every possible form it can take, refusing to leave you alone. Robert Harling would not film Steel Magnolias anywhere except Natchitoches, Louisiana. This was not a preference. It was a condition. Natchitoches was his hometown, his sister's home, the foundation of the entire world the story took place in. There was no version of the film that did not take place there. 35 years later, Natchitoches is still living inside the world of that decision. Fans travel from around the globe to visit the filming locations, the American Cemetery, where Sally Field delivered her breakdown, the house used for the Eatonton family home, the church where Shelby married Jackson. People book flights to rural Louisiana, specifically to stand in places where fictional characters stood in a film from 1989. They are not visiting a set. They are visiting a specific experience of grief and love that the film made permanent. For the film's 30th anniversary in 2019, the town organized a weekend of events that included character look-alike contests, Easter egg hunts at the filming locations, and a celebration involving armadillo cake, a nod to the film's most memorably peculiar wedding reception detail. But the most meaningful thing Natchitoches did was not a celebration at all. The town dedicated an entire park to Susan Harling Robinson, not the character, the real woman. The Susan Harling Robinson Memorial Park has a fountain, benches, and a plaque with her photograph and a biography written by her brother. People show up there regularly, not just because they love the film, but because the park gives them somewhere to go with what the film made them feel. A town gave a real woman back her name, and her brother put it in the ground, so it could not be taken away. The house used for the Eatonton family scenes in Steel Magnolias was not demolished after filming ended or converted into something with no connection to its past. It became a bed and breakfast, and it is still operating today. Located at 320 Jefferson Street in Natchitoches, the Steel Magnolias house was built around 1841 and served as the filming location for all the family scenes involving Sally Field, Tom Skerritt, and Julia Roberts. The family who owned the property during production temporarily relocated so the crew could take over the house completely. After the film became a cultural phenomenon, someone realized that the building was sitting on a remarkable asset. The house now has 6 suites, each named for one of the film's characters. The Shelby room is decorated in her signature colors, blush and bashful pink. Guests can eat a traditional Southern breakfast in the same dining room where cast members ate their meals during filming. They can watch the movie in the actual family room where those scenes were shot. It is, essentially, a fully immersive experience for people who do not merely want to watch Steel Magnolias, but want to inhabit it for a weekend. For fans who have seen the film 30 or 40 times, Sleeping in Shelby's house is something close to a pilgrimage. 23 years after the original, Lifetime produced a remake of Steel Magnolias with an entirely black cast, and it became a legitimate ratings phenomenon. The cast was extraordinary. Queen Latifah as MLYNN, Jill Scott as Truvy, Alfred Woodard as Weezer, Felicia Rashad as Clary, Adepero Dewey as Annelle, and Condola Rashad as Shelby. Queen Latifah also served as a producer, handling both the creative and business dimensions of the project simultaneously. The producers were deliberate about their intentions. They wanted to give talented black actresses the kind of complex, emotionally demanding leading roles that remained frustratingly scarce in mainstream Hollywood. One of the producers noted at the time that the story's core themes, friendship, motherhood, grief, the particular way that women hold each other up, transcend race entirely. The same story works if the cast is Latina, Asian, or any other community, because the emotions underneath it are human. The remake preserved the original play's dialogue and structure while updating the setting to contemporary times. It premiered on October 7, 2012, and pulled in more than 6 million viewers, making it the third most-watched original movie in Lifetime's history and their biggest rating success since 2006. Critics generally praised the new cast, with particular admiration for Woodard and Felicia Rashad, and acknowledged that the material lost nothing in translation. The story belongs to whoever needs it. Director Herbert Ross wanted the hospital sequences to feel authentic. He achieved this in a way that crossed the line between filmmaking and something much more difficult to categorize: